Here at Talentism, our purpose is to systematically unleash human potential. Your potential is deeply personal and looks different from everyone else. To grow towards your potential, it's important to have clear self-awareness as to what this looks like and to understand why that picture holds true for you. Talentism's framework to help you understand this for yourself is the Big Four. In this self-study module, you will learn from one of the creators of our IP, Trevor Hunter. Trevor is the head of IP at Talentism, in addition to being the head of our coaching practice and a senior executive coach. In this module, Trevor will walk you through the Big Four model so that you will understand Talentism's core IP. You'll connect the Big Four framework to your own personal experiences, and this will prepare you for your upcoming training session. Before continuing with the module, please make sure you have what you need to take notes. A few times throughout the module, you'll be asked to consider a personal reflection to make the content most relevant for you. This is an important part of the learning. It will also be valuable for you to take notes throughout on any questions you have. You'll have an opportunity to ask these questions during your upcoming training. Here's our agenda for how we'll accomplish our goals. First, Trevor will walk you through an overview of the Big Four framework, and then he'll break it down into the 4 components: purpose, talent, opportunity, and home. You'll have an opportunity for personal reflection for each of these 4 components. Then he'll summarize the Big Four, and you can pull it all together. So now let's begin. Here's Trevor.
Thank you, Sharon. Every human being is unique. I'm sure you've heard this line before, whether as a statement of affirmation or the setup to a Hallmark greeting card quality punchline. But we're starting this module with this statement, not as a celebration of individuality, but as a statement of reality. Every human is unique. If you design your business according to the most quote-unquote logical groupings of responsibilities and then hire and discard people according to whether they fit the exact spec of their job, you're going to create confusion. Every human is unique, so if you want to deal productively with confusion and unlock the potential of your clients, your employees, or yourself, you need to start with who that person is and not just the expectations that have been placed upon them. The way that Talentism understands individuals in their context is through our Big Four framework. By identifying and tracking 4 aspects of what a person is like, we can form reasonable hypotheses about where they will be able to provide the most value in a company. The 4 components of the Big Four are a person's sense of purpose, their talent, the opportunities that make sense to them, and their home. When someone's work is aligned to these 4 areas, they will achieve optimal productivity and optimal experience. That is, they will do the thing that they do better than anyone else. They will find their superpower. Let's start with purpose. Why people gravitate toward and feel rewarded by the goals that they accomplish. Purpose is a loaded word and one that has many definitions. People often use the word interchangeably with passion or drive or any number of other concepts. They often also refer to purpose as a singular thing. One person has one purpose. But Talentism thinks about things a little differently than that. When we talk about purpose, we're talking about the combination of 2 things, compulsion and meaning. We think that somebody can have many different senses of purpose, resulting from many different combinations of those 2 things. Now, I don't mean compulsion in the clinical or pejorative sense of the word. This isn't about addiction or anxiety disorders. By compulsion, we mean that it's behavior you can't turn off and don't even want to. I'll give you an example. So I'm a clarity coach, and that style of coaching involves a set of behaviors, asking probing questions, challenging the syntheses of the people I'm coaching, driving towards sense-making rather than comfort, etc., etc. One of the reasons that I am a coach is because I've exhibited those behaviors for a very long time. Even today, I'll be at a social engagement with a client or a former client, and they'll remark to me how I don't ever seem to take off my coaching hat. And I don't. Fact is, I don't want to. It's a compulsion of mine. Luckily, I figured out a way to get paid to do it. But compulsion by itself isn't a purpose. If I only had compulsion to coach, I would burn myself out. It takes effort. It takes attention. If I didn't have a way to quote unquote refill the tank, as it were, I would probably become a shut in. No, in order to unlock someone's purpose, you need to find the compulsion that leads to outcomes that the person finds meaningful, that make it seem like the effort was worth it. If my coaching resulted in people's lives getting worse, I'd not find the outcomes meaningful and I'd stop coaching. Or at least I hope I would. If you're constantly striving to impress someone you work with and they're still never impressed, you're going to burn out. Meaningful outcomes fuel our work, and combined with productive compulsions, a person's purpose can be unlocked. When someone is in a context where they are confused about their purpose or doing work that is unaligned to their purpose, it's often quite obvious. You're less motivated and your goals have less meaning for you. You put in less effort into your work, and despite that fact, you still feel drained by your job. People around you may tell you that you need more grit, but the fact is, on some deep level, you don't actually care about the goals you're trying to achieve. And that doesn't make you feel bad, it just makes you confused. But through self-awareness, self-acceptance, and humility, and productive experiments, you can clarify your purpose. When your work is aligned to your compulsions and you find the outcomes meaningful, you feel energized by your work. You find achieving your goals deeply rewarding. You want to do the work whether anyone tells you to or not, and are compelled to ensure quality outcomes. In short, you are beginning to align your work to yourself and pursuing your own greatness.
When you think about your own purpose, what comes to mind? What do you feel compulsion to do? What outcomes are meaningful to you? Are there examples that come to mind? What's your evidence that makes you believe this to be true? Pause the recording to reflect and write down your thoughts.
Gaining clarity about one's purpose is a necessary step towards unlocking one's potential, but it's not sufficient. The next area that must be clarified for an individual's big four is their talent. That is, what people do or use to accomplish their goals. Now, when I say talent, it can become easy to instead hear skill or experience. It's, after all, a common dogma that skills and experience are the things you need to seek out when you're filling a role. And it's not that skills and experience aren't relevant information as to whether someone will be excellent at fulfilling their responsibilities. Of course they are. But the great bulk of evidence shows that neither is particularly predictive of whether someone will be excellent in their role. But more on that later. Now, when Talentism talks about finding clarity about your talents, we're talking again about the combination of two things: rate of improvement and distinction. Starting with rate of improvement. The first question we might ask when unleashing someone's excellence is, how much better are they going to get at their responsibilities in their current context? It's not an uncommon thing to see a new, younger hire outpace an experienced employee in some areas. Often we might explain that with narratives around the relative levels of intelligence of the two employees, which might or might not correlate. But what it is evidence of is that for this particular talent, the younger employee has a higher rate of change with practice. So, for instance, I had a client that got hired to help a founding group on the basis that he was the only person anyone in the group knew who had ever even taken a computer class in college. He had taken one. He barely knew how to code JavaScript. He barely knew how to code much of anything. But 4 years later, he was the CTO of a massive company with dozens of engineers reporting up to him. His rate of improvement was astounding. But rate of improvement can also be more banal things. For instance, both my nephew and I play guitar, and we both went to school for music. Now, I'm reasonably sure that when he was in high school, I had put in many, many more hours of practice into the guitar than he had. But even then, it didn't really matter. He was just better than me. And even now, I still practice guitar all the time, and now he's much, much better than me. The fact is that with the same amount of work, he improved faster. The next area that we're concerned about when defining and understanding talent is distinction. We all have many skills, that is, abilities to do things, and attributes, by which I mean more or less inherent aspects of ourselves, like how strong or charismatic we are. Skills show up on every resume and job spec, And God help the corporate applicant that doesn't have a basic facility with Excel. But there's also something of a math problem here. Somebody who knows Excel may be valued for that skill, but somebody who knows Excel and can visualize large data sets is a more rare and more valuable employee. Or, to use another example, an engineer who understands system architecture and is an excellent people person is a rare bird indeed, and potentially much more valuable than two people who are each good at one of those things. That engineer's distinction is much more than the sum of its parts. And if that engineer continually gets better at being a people-focused system architect with practice, you have potentially found excellence in their talents. When people are confused about their talents, there are some obvious signs, though managers rarely process those signals well. If you're confused about your talents, you'll have responsibilities that are not aligned with what you're good at. It will take you longer and take more effort to complete routine tasks. You will see slow or no improvement over time, and achieving quality outcomes is distractingly difficult. However, if you're clear about your talents, you seek out responsibilities that are aligned with what you're good at. You feel in flow when completing tasks, and you get better and better over time with additional experience. Achieving quality outcomes becomes the norm.
What talents have you demonstrated to accomplish your goals? Have you demonstrated this as a talent by improving over time? What combinations of your talents make you distinct? What's your evidence that these are your talents? Please pause the recording to consider and write down your responses.
The next piece of the Big Four is opportunity. That is, where you can accomplish your goals. As with other aspects of the Big Four, opportunity involves two things, but this time the relationship is decremental. So let's start with the market. That is, what is the customer willing to give you for the thing you are talented at? The customer may be a consumer, maybe a business, maybe the company you're working for, etc. The market may be huge, it may be crowded, it may be unknown, but people are going to be willing to exchange goods and services for what you do. If that thing is building sports cars, they're going to be willing to give you a lot. If that thing is underwater basket weaving, the market will be quite small. But whatever the size of the market, the question is whether you'll be able to take advantage of it. If you're Big Four aligned, that means that your talents fit the opportunity. But you may still have fears that prevent you from being able to capture the value in the market. For instance, I receive a lot of feedback that I have some talent around presentations. As you are currently watching a presentation that I am talking over, you may or may not agree with that. But for the purposes of this thought experiment, let's pretend like that feedback is representative of reality. Fact of the matter is, I don't really like giving presentations. I get anxious, I procrastinate, I avoid. Or to use a more direct synonym, I have a fear of public speaking. Yes, even on recording. I don't feel particularly bad about that. Glossophobia, fear of public speaking, good word, is the number one fear in the United States. But when that fear overrides my compulsion towards my goals, it very practically limits what my opportunity is. If there's the possibility to speak at a big, important conference about Talentism's ideas, and my fear gets in the way of our ideas being exposed to that audience, then I have reduced the opportunity that is available for me to achieve my goals and Talentism's goals. Now, not every fear is irrational. You might have the desire to engage in underwater basket weaving, but fear of not being able to provide for your family, and that fear would be legitimate. But it's still a fear that mitigates what is available to you. It still mitigates your opportunity. When you're confused about your opportunity, you're not aligning your talents to your context. Your talents are not being valued by that context, and your fears are greater than your compulsions. Conversely, in clarity, your talents are valued in the context because you've made the effort to align them to the context, and your talents are needed to achieve the goals of the company, and your compulsions are outweighing any fears that might hold you back.
Where will your talents be best leveraged and valued? What fear or threats create a barrier to you exploring this opportunity? What's your evidence for your perspective? Pause the recording to reflect and write down your response.
The last piece of the Big Four is home, a context where how things work makes sense to you. I like to tell a little story to illustrate home. In my family, I usually do the cooking for holiday meals. One year, my brother invited me to his house to cook about half the dishes for Thanksgiving. Everything I decided to make was something I was familiar with: Brussels sprouts, gougères, potatoes, etc. But as I attempted to navigate his kitchen for the first time on Thanksgiving morning, I found myself getting more and more agitated. I didn't know where any of the kitchen implements were kept, and I had to keep asking. The kitchen was a thoroughfare, lots of traffic, and I kept running into people. Others would move my prepared ingredients, and I wouldn't realize it until it was time to add it to the recipe. The result was I didn't finish all the dishes I had intended to make, and the quality of food was well below my standards. And also, I'd been irritable all day. Because I was not in my home, literally in this case, I was in threat, driving towards certainty, and I didn't achieve my goals. The context of someone's work is the business they work in: their goals, their management, leadership, and especially their culture. If someone's home is not aligned with their work, they will almost inevitably turn out similar to what happened to me when I was cooking in a different kitchen: constantly confused, turning towards certainty, and not achieving excellence. I had a client early in my coaching career, a data analyst for a software company. Her previous work had been with academia and nonprofits, and the way that she felt comfortable working was deliberately with very high standards of proof. She worked very hard, but she was very careful. She celebrated and valued methodological rigor. But software startups have to move fast, and this one was no exception. Her colleagues were praised for just getting things out the door. The things my client valued and was talent aligned to were considered hindrances and the subject of negative feedback. Because she was not in her home, she was constantly struggling with BSL narratives around shoddy work and the immoral motivations of her coworkers. And she was failing to achieve the goals that her company had required of her. Conversely, I've had another client that was struggling with lots of confusion around the areas of his big four. But he was in his home. Because he was in a place where he could make sense of the way people around him behaved, and he felt safe to be more vulnerable, at least in a way that made sense to him, he's been able to work productively through some really challenging questions about purpose, talent, and opportunity, and gain greater clarity about all three. Now, it's an ongoing project, as we all are, but having a home means that his chances of productively pursuing his potential are much higher. The reason that home is the wrapper here is the surrounding context for all the other areas of the Big Four is that without home, it's exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to be able to gain clarity about anything else. When you're confused about your home, the way people behave does not make sense to you, and you don't feel comfortable around them, and often they don't feel comfortable around you. Behaviors that are celebrated in your environment are not the ones that you actually care about. You feel like a square peg trying to fit in a round hole. But when you have clarity about your home, the way people behave does make sense to you, and it is comfortable for you. What is celebrated in this context aligns with the things you care about, and you feel welcome and safe.
If you think about your home, what are the elements included that make sense to you? What is present in the culture that makes it feel like home? Paint a picture of your best case scenario. What from your past experience provides evidence that what you describe is your home? Pause the recording to reflect and write down your response.
I'd like to end with this example of a Big Four. I hope this can demonstrate for you how you can think through your purpose as a combination of your compulsions and things that you find meaningful, your talent as a combination of the things that make you distinct as well as the things that you get better with practice, your opportunity, that is, what markets are available for your talents and how does fear mitigate those markets, as well as your home, that is, the context that makes sense for you. Now, this Big Four example is actually one I filled out for myself a few years ago. And interesting reflection, and one that I think is relevant, I look at this now, and some of the things certainly still seem very, very true. But a number of things I feel like actually I've evolved past, if they're not necessarily not true anymore, but less relevant than I think they were when I filled this out. And I think that's going to be true for all of you if you ever go back and look at one of your old Big Fours. We evolve as people, ideally. That's kind of the whole point of this, is that if you're aligning your work with what you're like, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to make productive sense of your confusion and therefore maximizing the rate of your own personal evolution.
You've reflected throughout this module on each part of the Big Four framework. Take a few minutes now to pull it all together so that you can see a more holistic picture of your Big Four. Each experience you have is an opportunity to learn and reflect on your Big Four. The more you intentionally experiment and reflect on your experiences, the more clear your Big Four becomes. The more aligned your reality is to your Big Four, the more likely it is that you unleash your potential. Please pause the recording to consider your big picture of your Big Four. We hope this module has helped you to understand Talentism's IP, the Big Four, connect the Big Four framework to your own personal experience, and to prepare you for your upcoming training. From the whole team here at Talentism, thank you for your time and attention.